Hey everybody, Kaz the Mad Medic here. We're going to go over some hobby supplies today. And the big one I want to talk about is probably one of the most important ones that you may or may not have on your desk. Well, you have one, just which type, is the pallet. All right, there's a few dozen different ways to do it. When I first started hobbying, I used a Tupperware lid, like a Ziploc container lid. And from there, I've used a piece of ceramic tile that had a textured coating on it. That worked okay. The biggest thing we need are biggest thing we need our pallets to do is hold paint. Seems simple enough, right? Dry pallets have their place. So your Ziploc containers, your ceramic tile, and you can kind of get bombarded with it everywhere. Coming from a fine arts background, really the only thing I had ever used was a dry pallet. So this has been kind of a transition for me. If you don't have one already, you need a wet palette for mini painting or just small scale stuff. To tell you the truth, I've even started using one doing canvas painting, and especially for doing the fine detail work towards the end of a piece, it helps out astronomically. So I have my 3 wet palettes here. We'll kind of go through them. First one I have is the Army Painter wet palette. Not a terrible palette. It certainly does the job. It comes with a little elastic band on here for your first one. And if all you're doing is army painting, you're not doing heavy competition painting or painting a lot of different things at once, this isn't a bad option, especially for a starter. Pop the lid off. It's got a little storage compartment here for brushes and some tools. And once you put the elastic band around all this, the lid actually holds on pretty tight and it'll stay wet for quite a while, depending on your environment. If you're in a humid environment, things stay wet longer. If you're in a drier environment, they'll dry out faster. Luckily where I'm at, I live where the environment tries to kill you almost the entire year. It's either so cold it hurts your face or so humid that you walk outside and breathe water. It's just great. And then you've got a decent size wet palette in here. Normally there's a piece of sponge in here that you would put some water in this, make sure the sponge is good and damp, and then lay. You can buy the Army Painter paper to go over it. Tell you the truth, parchment paper works about as good as the commercial papers, and you can buy a whole roll of it for significantly cheaper than you would buy the brand names or for the hobby. We're actually going to do that one last. This one is the Red Grass Games wet palette. In case that wasn't enough, this thing is enormous. They have different sizes. This was just the one I happened upon after I actually saw it in a video from another content creator, and I really liked it. And I still like it. It's a very nice wet palette. It has a rubber seal on the tray that makes it nearly impossible to take apart to a point, especially once you get water in here and it starts to pressurize. Same deal, put some foam in here, put some parchment paper over the top. This thing is great. My only complaint about it is how big it is. It takes up a lot of desk space, and depending on your hobbying setup, you may not have the space to spare. That is my only complaint about this. Otherwise, it's fantastic. It's a bin that does exactly what it is advertised to do. They do sell some accessories. If you look on here, there's these little tracks on the side. They sell some accessories that you can clip to the side. I never bothered to pick any of them up, but I've seen them on their website. This is a fantastic wet palette. And then we get to this guy. I'm not going to wave this one around very much because I actually just finished a painting session and it's still full of paint. This one is Game Envy designed. It has a bunch of bells and whistles. It's not terribly large, which is nice if you're short on space or if you're carrying it around with you. The top of it has a pop open storage for brushes, and then the version I got comes with this little dry palette. And then it's also got a brush rest and a couple other things on there. But this is fantastic to have just nearby if you're doing oil washes or you need something that needs mineral spirits to clean it out, or metallics if you don't want to mix your metallics into your wet palette. This is a fantastic little add-on that just comes with it. It's got this little pop-up here, so you can pop that open if you're in a environment where you need to get air in here because things are getting too wet. Or you can keep it closed. I usually keep it closed because it maintains its humidity fairly well. And there again, I'm not transporting it very often, so it's in the house, so it's already in a temperature controlled environment. And it's not that big of an issue. I'll set that off to the side. There again, kind of like the rest of them, foam pad, parchment paper, and you have to use parchment paper, not wax paper. Parchment paper will actually let the water seep through into the paint to help keep it wet, because that is what we need a wet palette to do, keep things wet. You will find, depending on what paints you're using, after they've been on the wet palette for a while, they will separate. Usually I note that with Green Stuff World's paints. They're not bad paints, but when I use them on here after a couple hours, they are so separated from the binders and pigments that they're not savable, and it's easier to just wipe them off the paper and start again. But I picked this wet palette up at Adepticon this year, where I happened to be able to talk to the guy and get a set of these that they had out for sale. If you've ever used a wet palette before, then you know the paper curling can be an issue, especially when you first put it down on there. They sell these little weights that go in the corners, and they're made of copper. They're great. They keep the paper down, but the bigger thing is it changes the environment, primarily the pH level in the water, so your wet palette doesn't get funky. Wet palettes, there again, you have moisture, you have paint, you've probably touched it with your fingers. They can get moldy. A lot of people say to put it in the refrigerator, and it helps stop that process. And I've lost a couple of mats on the Army Painter one because they got scummy and things started growing in them. At one point I forgot about it, and I opened it to start a painting project, and something winked at me, I'm pretty sure, because it was nasty. These, so far, I've had this full of water. Well, not full of water, but I've had it damp in here for quite a while now, and nothing's getting scummy. There's no mold, there's no smell. I cannot recommend these enough, and you can buy these separate. So even if you already have a wet palette, head over to Game Envy and get a set of these, which, by the way, disclaimer, this is all my opinion. I'm not being paid for any of this. And I'm a big fan of just, if I see a product I like and I find out it works for me, I am more than happy to pass that knowledge on to the fine folks watching this video, whoever you may be. Yeah, those are my recommendations for wet palettes. I know there's more out there, but these are just the 3 that I've happened upon and thoroughly enjoy. That is all for me today. Like, comment, subscribe, drop a comment. What's your favorite wet palette? Have you used wet palettes and hated them? Is there another palette you like better? By all means, tell me. I may try it. I may not. I'll at least try to respond to the comment at the very least. Otherwise, everybody, happy hobbying. We'll see you next time.